Most people fear silence. They rush to fill it with words, with noise, with distraction, with movement. But the ancients, they revered it because they knew something we've forgotten. That silence isn't emptiness. It's the original frequency, the signal before sound, the space before form. It's not a void, it's a portal. To go inward is not to escape the world. It is to enter it more deeply. Because beneath the noise of your mind, beneath the roles, the reactions, the stories, there's a stillness, a silence. And that silence is not passive. It's alive. It holds answers without questions. It holds truth without language. It holds a part of you you've never lost, only stopped listening to. We live in a world that rewards volume, that equates noise with importance. We're trained to react, to speak fast, to fill space, to produce. But in doing so, we disconnect from the deepest layer of knowing, the one that doesn't speak, because it doesn't need to. The Hermeticists, the Taoists, the mystics of every lineage, they all pointed to the same thing. The doorway to the higher realms is silence, not just external quiet, but internal stillness. A mind not enslaved by thought, a nervous system not hijacked by urgency, a presence not scattered by distraction. That's where the real wisdom lives, not in words, but in what surrounds them. Because silence is not what's left when sound ends, it's what allows sound to exist in the first place. Just like space is not the absence of matter, it's the stage where matter appears. So what happens when you stop resisting silence? When you stop fearing the pause? When you let go of the need to do and simply be? Something begins to shift. The chatter in your head starts to quiet. The tension in your chest starts to soften. And in the absence of noise, a presence emerges. Still, vast, unshakable. Not you as the thinker, but you as the witness, the one who was always watching. And in that moment, you don't feel disconnected anymore. You feel home. That's the power of silence. It doesn't give you something. It reveals what was always there. And what's there is everything. Silence sounds simple, but it isn't easy. Because silence doesn't just reveal peace. At first, it reveals noise. When you sit in stillness, you don't meet your higher self immediately. You meet your resistance, your racing thoughts, your fears, your compulsions, your urge to check, to move, to distract. Why? Because silence doesn't just soothe, it exposes, it strips away your defenses, it removes the background music you use to drown your discomfort. It holds up a mirror to the internal static you didn't even know was running. Most people can't sit in silence for more than a few minutes, not because they're too busy, but because they're too loud inside. Because silence doesn't just ask you to listen, it asks you to feel what you've been avoiding, to hear what you've been ignoring, to face what you've been covering in noise. And the mind doesn't like that. The mind wants control. It thrives on commentary, comparison, calculation. It wants to label, judge, organize, fix. But silence? It doesn't want anything. It just is. And that threatens the ego. Because in silence, you are no one, no label, no role, no story, just presence. And presence is terrifying to an identity built on performance. That's why your mind resists silence. Not because it's boring, but because it's powerful. Because it dissolves everything the ego clings to. But here's the truth. You can't force your way into silence. You can't make the mind shut up. You can only let go. Silence isn't achieved, it's allowed. It's what's left when you stop clinging to thought. It's what rises when you stop fighting what is. Stillness is not the absence of movement, it's movement so aligned that it no longer creates disturbance. Think of a still lake. It's not frozen, it's at peace, and that peace creates reflection. When your mind becomes still, you begin to see, not with your eyes, with your awareness. You begin to notice subtleties. You sense patterns. You feel energy. You remember what it means to simply exist without agenda. And from that space, clarity arises, not in words, not in thoughts, but as a knowing, a quiet certainty that doesn't need explanation. Because the truth doesn't shout. It arrives in silence, not to convince you, but to be felt. And that's when you realize you never had to escape your mind. You only had to stop believing everything it said. There is a moment in stillness when something opens, not outside you, inside. The edges of thought soften. The boundaries of the self blur. Time slows, then disappears. And suddenly, you're no longer inside your mind. You're inside something vast, something sacred, something alive. This is not imagination, it's not fantasy, it's a state of consciousness that mystics across time have touched and struggled to describe. Because how do you explain the place beyond language? The ancients knew that silence was not just a tool, it was a technology, a frequency, a portal, a bridge between realms. In silence, the veil thins. You begin to sense patterns, not just in thought, but in reality. You begin to feel truth, not as information, but as vibration. You begin to access the Akashic field, the dimension where all knowledge, all memory, all potential lives. Not by trying, by tuning. Because silence is not empty space, it's resonant space. And when your inner world becomes still enough, you match its frequency, and the universe begins to speak, not in words, but in alignment, in synchronicities, in intuitions too perfect to be coincidence. This is why monks sit, why sages fast, why shamans go inward, not to escape the world, but to enter the part of it that can't be seen with eyes. Because in silence, you're not doing less, you're accessing more. The higher realms are not above you, they are here, now, in the silence between your thoughts, in the space between your breaths. But you must be quiet enough to notice. You must trust enough to stop grasping, to stop asking, to start listening, not to your mind, to your being. Because when the mind quiets, the soul speaks. And when the soul speaks, truth doesn't need convincing. It just lands, like light on still water, effortless, precise, complete. And in that moment you realize, you don't have to go anywhere to awaken. You just have to go nowhere. Because stillness isn't what you reach, it's what you remember. It was always there, beneath the noise, waiting for you to stop. If this is starting to feel familiar, it means you're waking up. Subscribe and turn on the bell. The remembering continues. Silence is not a break from life. It's where life begins again, clean, coherent, aligned. In a world addicted to stimulation, silence becomes rebellion, but not the noisy kind, the elegant kind, the kind that doesn't shout, because it doesn't need to. It simply moves differently. Because here's the secret. Stillness isn't passive, it's magnetic. When your field is quiet, you stop chasing. You start attracting. You stop scattering your energy across 1,000 anxious micro-decisions, and you pull it inward. You gather, you center, you hold, and the universe feels that. Because your vibration shifts, your breath deepens, your nervous system downshifts, your presence thickens, and when presence thickens, reality responds, not with force, but with flow. Because silence doesn't resist the moment, it meets it fully. This is why silence is the birthplace of clarity. You don't find direction by overthinking. You find it by becoming still enough to feel the next true step. The body already knows. The field already knows. Your higher self is already whispering, but the noise is too loud. And in silence, that noise dissolves. Suddenly, your intuition sharpens, not like a lightning bolt, but like a compass recalibrating. You start noticing energy, in rooms, in people, in words. You start hearing what's not being said, and trusting it. Because silence doesn't dull your senses, it tunes them, like cleaning the lens of a telescope. The stars were always there, you just couldn't see through the fog. But once the fog clears, you don't need to try to see. You just open your eyes, and you realize presence is power, stillness is strategy, silence is signal. It's not about doing nothing, it's about doing the one thing that lets everything else align. So when the world tells you to hustle, you go inward. When the noise says, decide now, you wait. When chaos pulls you in, you return to center. Because the real work is vibrational, and silence is the tuning fork. With it, you can access flow states, drop into altered brainwaves, restore hormonal balance, regulate your breath, ground your field, expand your aura. You become less reactive, more intuitive, less frantic, more focused. And from that space, you don't just live, you create, not out of lack, but out of resonance, not from fear, but from presence. Silence isn't just a solo practice, it's a transmission. It's the energy you carry into a room before you say a single word. It's the pause between your sentences, the space that gives meaning to the message. In a world obsessed with saying the right thing, silence reminds you. Presence says more than performance ever could. Have you ever stood next to someone who said nothing, but you felt everything? That's not charisma. That's coherence. That's the power of a regulated nervous system, of an integrated being, of someone whose internal world isn't trying to impress or manipulate, but simply resonate. Silence teaches you how to hold space, not to fix, not to advise, just to be. And in that being, healing happens. Because the deepest transformations don't come from words. They come from the safety of someone who doesn't need to fill the space. Think about it. When you're with someone who's truly present, you relax, your guard lowers, your breath deepens. Why? Because their silence gives you permission to meet your own. It's like an energetic mirror, reflecting your wholeness back to you. This is why some of the most powerful teachers say very little, because their energy does the speaking. It's why sacred texts are full of spaces, pauses, gaps, places where the reader must listen beyond the line. Because the truth isn't always in what's written, it's in what's felt. And the same is true with you. You can say all the right things, but if your energy is chaotic, your words won't land. But if your energy is still, your presence speaks volumes. It tells people you're safe, you're seen, you can slow down. And in today's world, that message is revolutionary. So practice silence, not just alone, but with others. Pause before you respond. Feel instead of react. Be with instead of doing for. And watch how connection deepens. Watch how people begin to open, how they lean in, how they soften. Not because of what you said, but because of who you were in the space between words. That's the silent revolution, the shift from noise-based influence to frequency-based impact. And it begins with stillness inside. Silence is not the end, it's the beginning of clarity, of alignment, of remembrance. Because when you stop speaking, you start hearing, not voices, not advice, but something deeper, the sound of your own being. It doesn't use words, it doesn't make promises, it doesn't ask for applause, it simply is. And in that isness, you rediscover everything you thought you lost. You remember that you are not your story, not your name, not your failures, not your roles. You are the awareness underneath it all. And silence is how you return to it. Not by force, by surrender. Because silence is not something you create. It's something you stop interrupting. It's always been here, under the noise, under the pressure, under the performance, waiting, like still water beneath a storm, like the night sky behind the clouds, like presence beneath your persona. And when you finally enter it, when you let the last thought fade, the last need dissolve, you realize you never had to seek truth. You only had to stop running from it. And truth lives in silence. That's where wisdom lands. That's where healing roots. That's where timelines collapse and soul-level decisions are made. So if you've been tired, overwhelmed, disconnected, stop trying to fix it with more input. Stop searching for the next answer. Instead, pause, close your eyes, feel your breath, drop beneath the noise, and listen. Not for anything specific, not for a voice from above, but for the quiet rhythm of your own being whispering, "I'm here." That's the real power. Not in saying the right thing, not in knowing the most, but in carrying a frequency so stable that reality bends around your presence. So cultivate your silence like a temple. Tend to it, honor it, let it become your resting place, your compass, your transmitter. Because the world doesn't need more noise, it needs more depth, more awareness, more stillness. It needs people who are not afraid to be quiet, and therefore cannot be shaken. And maybe that person is you. Maybe it always has been.